Water is a mysterious and unpredictable force, capable of swallowing up everything in its path. The Great Lakes, infamous for their harsh weather and unexplained phenomena, have long been a hotspot for strange occurrences. Given the eerie nature of these waters, it's no surprise that they've uncovered some truly bizarre discoveries over the years. Here are 20 of the craziest things ever found in the Great Lakes, along with a few unexpected surprises from other places too. Number 20. The Lost Canyon under Lake Powell. The McKay Canyon in Utah is an extremely beautiful place, and it's no doubt giving you all the feels right now with its epic drone footage that you're probably enjoying, you lucky people. Where the heck would we be without the drone camera? I ask you this. Anyway, this extraordinary place is in Utah, a place that's so full of awesome-looking landscapes and loads of cool rocks that it's often hard to choose which bit to talk about. However, today, because it's written in this script, I'm here at Lake Powell in the McKay Canyon. There was at one time a large ancient population dwelling in the canyon, but many of the structures that existed here were flooded by the lake. Many more have gradually eroded over time, and as the waters of the lake subside, they reveal cake-like structures in the sides of the stone canyon and many spaces tucked into the landscape. The canyon is formed from sandstone, which is very beautiful and has all of those lovely colors within it, but it's also soft and erodes away pretty easily. That's why it forms these nice shapes and such like that we appreciate so much. Number 19. Car Graveyard. Underneath the bluffs of St. Joseph, Michigan, lies a car graveyard along the Lake Michigan shoreline. In the late 1960s, relentless erosion had threatened the homes of St. Joseph's residents, so they resorted to some rather unconventional methods to protect their property. During that period of time, Lake Michigan's water levels had surged, and the traditional erosion control methods were not enough to keep it from their homes. So the residents came up with a really 1960s solution to the problem. It was not the most eco-friendly idea, but nobody gave a about stuff like that back then. So they dumped over 230 junk cars down the embankment, creating a makeshift barrier that was intended to break the waves and stabilize the shoreline. And now that is a classy act. The community's collective efforts, including discarding various other large trash items, seemed that dumping waste, washing machines, dryers, beds, and cars, all over the bluff in a bid to halt the erosion was an acceptable way to handle a crisis. These days, this is really a stupid idea and no doubt would have led to all types of gross stuff leaking into the water and polluting everything in sight. In fact, you can still see this makeshift steel breakwater when the lake is actually low. Number 18. Alligator in New York City Park Lake. In February of 2023, a rather toothsome and very unexpected visitor surprised those in Brooklyn's Prospect Park. Yes, it was a 4-meter-long alligator in the park's lake. Well, why wouldn't it be there? The alligator seemed to be suffering from extreme lethargy and cold shock as it was rescued by the New York City Parks Department. Although nobody really knew for sure, they imagined that the alligator was most likely an abandoned pet that had been released into the wild after having outgrown its own space. Well, duh. If anybody ever imagined that an alligator would make an awesome pet in New York City, then they need their head examined. First of all, alligators are cold-blooded, so they need sunshine to bask in, or they will expire. Secondly, alligators have a tendency to grow and grow and grow, so they don't really make that awesome of a pet. This particular alligator had signs of poor treatment and even had a bath plug in its digestive system, which would indicate the level of brain cells the person who had previously owned it likely had. After it was rescued, the alligator was then taken to the Bronx Zoo for rehabilitation, but unfortunately, despite the real efforts of the zoo's veterinary team, the alligator was suffering from extreme health problems and eventually died in April of 2023. Number 17. The Loch Ness Monster. The legend of the Loch Ness Monster, or Nessie as she is affectionately known, has captured the imaginations of people for generations. The photographs that surfaced in the 1930s, that have since been debunked and proven as fakes, have given thousands of monster hunters hope that Nessie has been hiding out in the chilly waters of Scotland's Loch Ness. Various ideas have been attached to Nessie. She could be a leftover from the dinosaurs, somehow having survived the event that wiped out the rest of her species. Or perhaps she was a massive eel. Or maybe even a giant Greenland shark that had found herself in the wrong waters. There are as many theories as there are enthusiasts, so wherever there are myths, there are party-pooping people trying to dispel those stories. Back in 2019, some researchers from New Zealand decided to focus their investigations on the waters of Loch Ness by extracting DNA from samples of the water from the loch. The scientists determined what kind of creatures live there. Their conclusions, they say, have shown that there is no evidence that a prehistoric creature like the Loch Ness Monster lives there, nor a really big old Greenland shark or catfish. What they did find, though, was lots and lots of eel DNA. They say that this most likely means that there is a sizable population of European eels in the loch. But they also say the DNA doesn't indicate what size these eels might be. In fact, they can't rule out giant eels. So the mystery of Nessie lives on, and she might be real after all. Number 16. Mysterious stone formation in Lake Michigan. Well, this is exciting, not to mention really rather weird. And whether it can be explained or not, well, that remains to be seen. Archaeologists were busy scanning the vast underneath of the waters of Lake Michigan, looking for shipwrecks. But they came across something distinctly unusual and much, much older. While using remote sensing techniques in the Grand Traverse Bay area of Lake Michigan, at about 12 meters below the surface, they discovered a big boulder with a prehistoric carving that appears to depict a mastodon, which is generally a woolly mammoth. And then, nearby to that exciting discovery, they found a series of stones that had seemingly been arranged in a kind of Stonehenge style. This bunch of old prehistoric rocks was nestled in amongst the regular old detritus of the lake, the old cars, wrecks, and randomly a Civil War-era rifle. But there, hiding in this wreckage, was an archaeological gem. Apparently, tell me if I'm wrong though, and yes, I know it's underwater, but this is lacking some of Stonehenge's enormous and imposing swagger, right? I mean, how big is it even? I expect a little more from my prehistoric monolith. Well, thank the heavens. Now it's time for today's topic. In a stunning discovery at Lake Powell, straddling the border between Utah and Arizona, a team of American marine biologists encountered what might be the largest freshwater fish ever documented. During a deep-water mapping expedition of the lake's mysterious canyons, researchers came face-to-face with a colossal specimen that has left the scientific community in awe. The creature, measuring an unprecedented 15 feet in length and estimated to weigh over 1,000 pounds, appears to be a previously unknown species of giant bass. Dr. Sarah Henderson, lead researcher from the University of Arizona, suggests this could be a surviving relative of Megalodontidae, thought to have gone extinct millions of years ago. What makes this discovery particularly remarkable is the fish's adaptation to the lake's unique ecosystem. Initial sonar mapping revealed a network of deep, underwater caves where these creatures might have remained hidden for centuries. Tissue samples show unusual cellular structures that allow the fish to thrive in both shallow and extremely deep waters. As researchers continue their investigation, this discovery has sparked intense interest from ichthyologists worldwide, suggesting Lake Powell's depths might harbor more extraordinary species yet to be discovered. Number 15. A corpse from the USS Kamloops. The SS Kamloops was an old-timey lake freighter from Canada. It was part of the Canada Steamship Line's fleet from when it was launched in 1924 until it was lost off Isle Royale in Lake Superior in December of 1927. All lives on board also went down with the ship. Late in November of 1927, the Kamloops was sent to the lakes carrying a whole bunch of different cargo, from tar to paper, wire for fencing, pipes, machinery, shoes, and even food. On December 1st, it stopped in at Courtrai, Ontario, to receive bagged salt on top of the rest of the cargo. The vessel would then head off across Lake Huron, through the Sault Ste. Marie Canal, and onto the tricky maneuvers of Lake Superior. It was not going to end well. Severe storms began battering the Kamloops and other vessels out there on the lake. The ship was heavily covered with ice when it was last seen on the 6th of December. Then, after that, the ship and all 22 people aboard would disappear forever beneath the freezing depths of the lake. The search for the ship began the following week, but nothing was ever discovered. They carried on until December 22nd, and the following year, a search for the wreckage began in April. Some bodies and parts of wreckage were discovered on the shore, but the main wreck was never found. Devastatingly, a message in a bottle was discovered in December of 1928, in which a young woman named Alice Barrage, who had been working on board the Kamloops, had written, "I am the last one left alive, freezing and starving to death on Isle Royale in Lake Superior. I just want Mom and Dad to know my fate." Number 14. Ancient hunting structures. An underwater ridge in Lake Huron revealed an extensive network of ancient stone lanes and V-shaped structures. It looks to be the most complex set of ancient hunting structures that has ever been found in the Great Lakes. The site is called Drop 45 Drive Lane. It has two parallel rock-lined paths, which would have once been used by ancient hunters to push caribou into a lane about 9,000 years ago. Archaeologists believe these hunters possessed an incredible understanding of animal behavior, strategically placing the structures to align with caribou migration patterns. Evidence suggests the hunters may have even used decoys or disguises made from caribou hides to lure the animals closer. The sheer scale of the operation implies it was a communal effort, requiring coordination among multiple groups to execute such large-scale hunts. This corral system would have helped the native people in the region to encourage the herds of migrating caribou into the then exposed corridor of land so that they could hunt them. The area is now below 120 feet of water, but it would have been in the open back then after the last ice age. Number 13. Lost Car Ferry. The SS Père Marquette 18 was once a steel-hulled railroad car ferry. It was first launched in 1902 to transport rail cars across Lake Michigan between ports in Michigan and Wisconsin. On September 9, 1910, while traveling from Ludington, Michigan to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the vessel began taking on water under mysterious circumstances. Some speculate that a rogue wave or structural failure may have been to blame, as the ship had recently undergone repairs that were rumored to be rushed. Passengers reported hearing loud bangs coming from below deck just before the flooding began, fueling theories of sabotage or catastrophic mechanical failure. Panic spread quickly among the crew and passengers as icy water poured into the lower compartments, despite their frantic efforts to pump it out. The crew naturally made great efforts to manage the flooding, but unfortunately, the ship sank 25 miles off the coast of Sheboygan, and at least 29 lives were lost in the disaster, including all of the ship's officers. This meant that nobody ever really found out what happened and why the ship had sunk. More than a century later, in 2020, shipwreck hunters finally discovered the wreckage of the Margaret A in about 500 feet of water east of Sheboygan. Number 12. World War II aircraft. It seems completely bizarre that, when there was no fighting on U.S. soil in World War II, an area of the country would contain quite so many lost aircraft from that war. But here we are, and the Great Lakes are apparently the final resting place for more than 200 military aircraft from that particular conflict. Crazy. The majority of these aircraft were lost as a result of accidents that occurred when Navy aviators tried to qualify for takeoffs and landings on carriers on Lake Michigan. Even though some aircraft have been recovered from the lakes, the majority of those that were lost have not been found. The area was used for a lot of training during the war, and the pilots would practice aerial combat and various bombing exercises over Lake Huron. This area was preferred as it was thought to have weather conditions and geology that would be similar to the expected terrain in Europe, where it was anticipated that the aviators would be headed. A bunch of the aircraft, however, never made it, and lots of them sank to the bottom of the vast expanse of the Great Lakes, never to be seen again. Number 11. German U-boat. Following Germany's surrender at the end of World War I, the submarine known as U-97 was among several U-boats handed over to the United States as war reparations in 1919. The U.S. Navy sailed the vessel across the Atlantic, through the St. Lawrence Seaway, and into the Great Lakes. After that, the submarine toured around various ports to raise funds for Liberty bonds and to help recruit for the United States Navy. But all of this trundling around being promotional led to a bit of wear and tear on the old sub. By late August of 1919, mechanical issues had led to UC-97 being moored in Chicago's Grant Park, where it was opened up to the public. There was a clause in the Armistice Treaty that stated that all German warboats held by the Allied forces had to be destroyed before July 1, 1921. So, on June 7, 1921, after it had been stripped of any valuable stuff, the U-boat was towed into Lake Michigan and used as a target during naval training exercises. It was then sunk in the process, but everyone seems to have forgotten where they actually left it. In 1992, some people claim to have found it, but this has never officially been verified. Number 10. Medieval soldier at the bottom of Lithuanian lake. Now, this next one is absolutely nothing at all to do with the Great Lakes, but we here at the Thought Trail, well, you know that we like to keep you on your toes, so here you go. This is the story of a discovery of a body that belonged to a soldier more than 500 years ago. It turns out that this medieval soldier's mortal remains had sunk to the bottom of a lake in the east of Lithuania. It had then been covered up by layers upon layers, never to be revealed again until just recently. The discovery was made during an underwater inspection of an old bridge in the lake. The skeleton lay beneath layers of sand and silt, but it was determined the soldier had not been deliberately buried there. It seemed more like the body had simply gradually been covered up by sediment as the water currents moved silt around over the centuries. Scientists from the University of Vilnius came and had a good look at the old bones and then discovered that the soldier had apparently died all the way back in the 16th century. They could not determine what the cause of death had been, but other items, including a sword that was found nearby, seemed to confirm that he had been a military soldier. There was also a pair of leather boots, complete with spurs, a leather belt and buckle, and 2 knives with wooden handles. Somehow, the conditions had left the artifacts astonishingly well preserved for all of this time. Number 9. A giant marble crucifix. Sometimes, the best way to make a tourist attraction is to chuck a massive crucifix in a lake and then let word spread about the eerie underwater sighting. You can add an origin story as you go, drawing together whichever sorts of elements seem best suited to the audience that is being drawn to the attraction. Well, that's one way to do it. I'm sure that it's not what happened here, though. There is an 11-ton-tall crucifix carved from white Italian marble in the waters of Little Traverse Bay, Petoskey, Michigan. It's been there since 1962, and the story of how it came to be there is as murky as lake water. Stories seem to center around several different tragic incidents, all of which have some claim over the underwater shrine. First is that it is in memory of Charles Raymond, who had drowned in Torch Lake. Then, there's the notion that it honors all of those who have perished at sea. Furthermore, The crucifix itself is said to have been created to memorialize the loss of a 15-year-old boy who was killed in an accident in 1956. The cross was then brought from Italy to the United States but was damaged, so it was rejected for the purpose of the boy's family. It was then allegedly sold to a local diving club, which is when it was first plopped into the bay. About 20 years later, that diving club had tried to salvage the cross and give it a little boost. Lights were added to illuminate it from below, and it's still available to view now. Although, who knows what its true purpose truly is. But statues look spooky underwater, so alright then. Number 8. Human remains in Lake Mead. Here we are again, back in the scorching hot summer of 2022, this time on the shores of Lake Mead in Nevada. It was a real eye-opener, and not in a good way. The water levels had receded so much that things began to surface that many would have preferred to remain hidden. Imagine a sunken vessel from the Second World War just sitting there, exposed for all to see. But that wasn't really the worst of it. As the water levels continued to drop, several sets of human remains would be uncovered. One was even found inside a barrel, which many have speculated could have been linked to a mob killing. It was a grim sight, to say the least. Officials were bracing themselves for even more disturbing finds, especially since the water level was the lowest it had been since 1937. In an area known for organized crime, they were anticipating more links to that activity. As you could imagine, there were a few false alarms, like some prop skeletons and animal bones, but given the area's history, officials were keeping a close eye out for anything that could have been related to organized crime. It's truly shocking to think about what else could be lurking beneath the water's surface. Number 7. Perfectly preserved shipwreck in Lake Superior. The Atlanta was a schooner that was built all the way back in 1891. It was lost during a fierce gale that very same year while it was being towed by a steamer that was also carrying a cargo of coal. The tow line had snapped in the intense pressure during the storm. Without sails, the Atlanta was left vulnerable. Some reports suggest the crew fought desperately to keep the ship afloat, even attempting to rig makeshift sails as the storm raged on. Witnesses from nearby vessels described seeing the Atlanta bobbing like a cork before disappearing into the icy depths. The crew abandoned ship and suffered for hours in a lifeboat, battling freezing temperatures and relentless waves. Tragically, their cries for help were heard by another passing ship, but it was too late to save most of them. Sadly, only 2 out of the 7 crew members even survived. The wreckage has since been located approximately 35 miles off of Deer Park, Michigan. It was found during a 2021 sonar mapping expedition, and crazily, it's been really well preserved despite spending more than a century at the bottom of a lake. Funnily enough, it was actually the very cold water that seems to have helped the vessel stay in such good condition. Even the name Atlanta could easily be read on the stern. Number 6. Hundreds of dead fish in Oakland County Lake. Back in July of 2021, the residents of Lake Orion in Oakland County, Michigan, woke up to an unsettling sight that brings to mind the opening scene of some kind of apocalyptic horror movie. This is not something that anyone would be especially thrilled about, I'm sure. There, on the surface of the lake, were hundreds of common carp floating lifelessly. It looked like there were anywhere between 250 and 500 fish in that one singular area, which is creepy. Now, of course, this also meant that the Michigan Department of Natural Resources began an investigation and started collecting samples for analysis at Michigan State University's Aquatic Animal Health Laboratory. These sorts of single-species die-offs are most often attributed to specific pathogens, and that's not exactly what one would call good news, although it is at least kind of positive that it was all one kind of fish. If it had been a whole bunch of species, it could have well been a water pollution problem, and that's an even worse thing to discover in your local lake. The Department of Natural Resources wanted to make sure, however, that nobody started freaking out, so they insisted that the virus that must have affected the carp posed no threat to humans or any other animal. Well, let's just hope that they were right about that, or else this could really be the beginning of a fish-based zombie apocalypse. Number 5. More human remains in Lake Mead. Well, this is great. This is exactly what we want to hear about. Hopefully, nobody's just sitting down to eat their dinner. Here we are again at lovely Lake Mead, and yes, it seems that this particular lake is positively stuffed full of corpses. During that long, hot, and very dry summer of 2022, the police department and the Clark County Coroner's Office were kept extremely busy as all of these dead bodies just kept surfacing. At one point, locals joked darkly that the lake was cashing in its chip after decades of keeping secrets hidden beneath its waters. Some of the remains were found encased in barrels, a chilling hallmark of organized crime from decades past. Investigators speculated that these deaths could date back to the 1970s or even earlier, tying them to infamous Las Vegas mobsters who once ruled the city with an iron fist. The dropping water levels turned the reservoir into an accidental time capsule, revealing fragments of a shadowy history many thought was long buried. The grim discoveries were almost certainly the result of mob activity, especially when one of them rocked up with a bona fide bullet wound, which is nice. Perhaps not such a lovely lake to go vacationing at after all. Number 4. Schooner wreck in Lake Michigan. In May of 2024, a vessel that had laid undisturbed beneath Lake Michigan for over 130 years was rediscovered. This was the schooner Margaret A, and its wreck was located under just 50 feet of water, a few miles off the coast of Algoma, Wisconsin. The Margaret A was once a 130-foot, three-masted wooden schooner that was to be used mostly for the Great Lakes grain trade. It had sailed for 21 years and transported all sorts of cargo across all 5 Great Lakes. During its heyday, it was known as one of the fastest ships on the lakes, often outrunning storms that would swallow slower vessels whole. Tales of its speed inspired local legends, with some claiming it could outrun the wind. But fate is unpredictable, and even the swiftest ships can fall victim to nature's fury. As the storm rolled in that fateful September night, eyewitnesses on shore reported seeing flashes of lightning illuminate the massive waves crashing against the doomed schooner. But, as we likely assumed given that we already looked at the wreckage, on September 30th of 1893, the vessel encountered a violent storm near the Wisconsin coast. All 6 of the crew members survived by rowing to shore in 15-foot waves, but tragically, the captain's faithful dog had perished in the sinking. Another victim of the dangerous and unpredictable waters of the Great Lakes. Number 3. 930-year-old canoe in North Carolina Lake. In April of 2023, archaeologists were positively delighted to retrieve this 930-year-old Native American dugout canoe from the depths of Lake Waccamaw in Columbus County, North Carolina. It had first been discovered a couple of years earlier when a group of teenagers were swimming near a pier and stumbled upon what they first thought was just a log. But they peered in a bit closer, and all that education in school must have stuck somewhere in their tiny little brains because they soon realized it was something else. The teens later joked about how their history teacher would finally give them an A for real-world application. Word spread quickly among locals, with some speculating the canoe might hold secrets of ancient trade routes or even hidden treasure. Excitement grew as divers examined the site, finding traces of tools still embedded in the wood, hinting at the craftsmanship involved. They even went ahead and reported it to the local authorities, and that's when the North Carolina Office of State Archaeology collaborated with one of the Waccamaw Indian tribes and began the task of excavating the canoe. It was finally released from the lake, and they could see just how special it was. It had been amazingly well preserved and gave everyone a look at the way in which Native Americans had built their boats hundreds of years ago in the past. Number 2. A cemetery at the bottom of Lake Van. Lake Van is the biggest lake in all of Turkey and also apparently the largest saltwater lake in the world. It's full of all kinds of old stuff, naturally, including apparently a lot of ruins, some of which are still easily recognizable with streets and remains of buildings, and in one place even a cemetery, which is spooky. It's also allegedly the home of a creature known as the Lake Van monster, a far more interesting story than a load of old tombstones. There are tales of vaps in the lake, and these are the water dragons of Armenian mythology. According to legend, there's a reaper of vaps that will drag out any of these water dragons that has grown so large that it may devour the world. The thing is, however, that despite being myths, there are also stories in modern times of people being dragged into this lake by alleged creatures. In 1889, a man was apparently pulled into Lake Van by one such monster. An official science survey sent in the aftermath did not uncover any kind of evidence of a creature in the lake, but then in 1997, some bloke said that he had a video of the monster to prove that it exists. But what do you think of this super janky footage? And why does he never pan left? I just wonder. But still, it never hurts to have a good monster story now, does it? I mean, look at the Loch Ness monster. Tourism is such a lucrative business after all. Number 1. Giant white sturgeon on Lake Washington shore. Here we are on the shore of Lake Washington, near a place with the wonderful name of Log Boom Park in Kenmore. It was here that a rather unusual discovery would be made. It was a massive white sturgeon, dead of course since it was on the shore, and this thing was truly enormous. Interestingly, white sturgeons are often referred to as living fossils because they have remained relatively unchanged for millions of years. This particular specimen, with its rugged, prehistoric appearance, seemed like a relic from another era. Locals gathered around, snapping photos and marveling at the sheer size of the creature, while experts speculated about its life in the depths of the lake. It measured more than 8 feet long, weighed somewhere between 300 and 400 pounds, and had most likely been between 60 and 80 years old. Now, a remarkable fish indeed, but apparently, however, these types of fish can actually grow even larger than this, sometimes more than 10 feet and heavier than 1,000 pounds. Wow. Well, that's all for today's deep dive into the underwater adventures of the Great Lakes and a few other random lakes around the world. Which of these fascinating discoveries has you wanting to know more? Go ahead and share all your thoughts in the comments section down below. Also, be sure to check out all the other cool stuff popping up on your screen. I'll see you next time.